The discovery of one of the most unusual areas in the world, which resembles the surface of the moon, was an extraordinary event. David Bunger was the leader of the so-called Western Group during the famous American military and scientific operation under the cryptonym High Jump. During one of many routine reconnaissance flights over the monotonously white continent, the captain noticed a dark spot in the ice. After using his binoculars, he tried to wipe the lens, assuming it was simply dirty. Brown color. It could have been rocks, but blue? Green? For a moment, Bunger thought of a strange refraction of lights, but the colors were too clean, too well known to the sailor's eye. Ice-free, unfrozen water. Here, in the Antarctic? Unbelievable. Very concerned about this breathtaking discovery, Bunger stated that finally a livable island has been found in the universe of death. By zooming the map, you can see dark blue and green water areas. First the Mawson Sea, then the Edisto Bay and the Cacapon Bay, and finally the Alger Lake. Due to strong salinity, its water freezes at the temperature of minus 20 degrees centigrade. Finally, you can notice a station located right next to its shore. The buildings resemble supply containers lost by a vessel and thrown ashore, or two forgotten wrecks of fishing boats. If they had not cast a shadow, the color of the wood they were made of would have blended in with that of the ground. The sight of them evokes a touching feeling of emptiness and loneliness. The modest huts of Shackleton and Scott, built a few decades earlier, look like exclusive polar resorts when compared with these two rakitic wooden barracks. During a moonlit night at the station, one's eyes unwillingly escape towards the glaciers. They phosphorize in the distance with a strong, mysterious glow. A strip of blue, sometimes greenish, floats like an airy scarf over the ice. Delicate and crumbly. It seems that the smallest sound is enough to crash into pieces like delicate porcelain. The quotes come from the diary of Czesław Centkiewicz, a participant of the first Polish expedition to the Soviet Oasis station. During the 9th night spent in the Antarctic solitude, the author makes nostalgic reflections in which delight is mixed with piercing anxiety. Everything here is repulsive and attracting at the same time. If one is not captivated by the uniqueness of this place, if it only fills them with fear, or even worse, with a feeling of boredom, they should run and never come back. That person is lost. The desolate Soviet cottages bring to mind the story of the Belgica ship trapped in the ice. Isolated from the world and immersed in the darkness of the polar night, the sailors' mental health started to deteriorate very quickly. Few have remained clear in their minds. Only some were able to continue the research. One of them was Antoni Bolesław Dobrowolski. The station was founded by Soviet polar explorers from the Mirny station in 1956, 9 years after the famous Bunger's hydroplane launching. The task of building two small wooden barracks sounded rather simple, but in the rock Bunger Oasis, it became a monumental undertaking. The very difficult conditions in which the Russians had to work are confirmed by the words of Boris Imernikov, one of the first managers of the station. You must have strong nerves here. Even in the summer, a bit of stronger wind is enough for us to be cut off from the world. During the polar night, winds blow here. They are long and deceptive. The first blow from the west does not exceed 15 meters per second, but it is followed by a powerful hurricane. Cottages sent along the axis of the wind vibrate and jump as if they were alive. You only want one thing in such a moment: to run away, to get out, to hide somewhere from this hauling and this nerve-wrenching struggle. The first users of the Soviet station called themselves the Oasians. The name Oasis, which the Soviet polar explorers gave to the newly founded station, obviously refers to the scientific term Antarctic Oasis. Nevertheless, the notion commonly associated with the weather paradise, a counterbalance to the desert landscape, is particularly grotesque when compared with the lifeless scenery of the photographic frames. The photographs of the Polish polar explorers show an oasis without trees or bushes, without grass, without any vegetation. Black emptiness, a gloomy stony piece of land. In order to reach the goal of the journey, it was necessary to cover a distance of 15,000 kilometers. Rapid weather breakdowns typical for this area forced the participants to evacuate immediately. Rescue operations were life-risking. However, in the face of changing weather conditions, staying longer in the station completely isolated from the rest of the world meant certain death. This is one of the reasons why the form of Polish polar explorers' notes referred to in the last chapter is so different from the prosaic reports on scientific research. For each of the authors, the possibility of taking part in polar expeditions was truly a special honor and distinction. Each of them would look out the window and with obsessive impatience and bated breath search for the fawn-colored walls of the two single-story houses standing close to each other in the black Oasis wilderness. Oasis, with its panorama, resembling paintings of some fantastic landscapes of severe worlds, unknown dead planets. It is worth mentioning that the first successful trans-Antarctic expedition took place only in 1958, therefore over 40 years after Shackleton's failure and just before the first Polish expedition to the A.B. Dobrowolski Station. Despite the support provided by all-terrain vehicles, light aircraft examining the area from above, the fate of the international expedition was hanging by a thread almost all the time. A few months later, a reconnaissance group consisting of Polish scientists using a Soviet ship Mikhail Kalinin headed to Antarctica so that they could officially take the Oasis station over. The ceremonial takeover of the bases took place in beautiful sunny weather. The Soviet flag waving high at the top of the mast was replaced by the Polish one, which ultimately confirmed the country's accession to the international cooperation on the White Continent. The scientists, touched by the grand moment, did not expect that the station would not be used for the consecutive years. Little did they imagine that their new national pride would immerse in lethargy, leaving the buildings in a condition described by Czesław Centkiewicz at the moment of leaving the station, all boarded up, closed, silent, hollow. The wrathful nature of Bunger Oasis manifested itself during all Polish expeditions. The aforequoted ominous archived telegrams came true already after 9 days of stay. Suddenly, there came a short message from the Mirny station ordering immediate preparations for evacuation. In his journal, Centkiewicz recalls the moments full of horror and absolute disorientation. The house shook and its very foundations cracked dangerously as if crushed by a giant paw. Steel lashings groaned. The first strong gust of wind howled. The walls are shaking and the floor is rattling, as if the Dobrowolski station was about to blow itself into the air. Behind a round of windows, now resembling a narrow opening of a ship porthole, more than ever I could swear the sea raging in the storm. Rough, distorted, mangled with the storm wind. The area cluttered with planks, paper, woodwool shreds, all cleaned up in a heartbeat. The wind raises them up in the air, shaking, breaking, crumbling, tearing and racing to the north. Rock falls from the shattered peaks are crushing against the walls of the house, blowing and rumbling. It seems that the whole rock desert is coming right for us, driven by the unstoppable storm. At first I can hardly take a breath. Everything around is grey, spectral. Everything is a whirl, havoc. Blasts of wind hissing, whistling, vicious, restless. Collapsing on the shoulders, crushing to the ground, pushing, pulling you as if they wanted to remove this obstacle, breaking it. Impossible to stand up straight. You've got to fight for every step. 7 years later, there was another launching at the Oasis. This time, however, the plane was not equipped with the floats adopted for that purpose. The expedition setting out from the Mirny station was expected to do only some aerial reconnaissance. However, the Polish scientists became so moved that they decided to take the risk of landing on the ice covering the Fishtail Bay. Unfortunately, the ice turned out too thin, and as a consequence, all the passengers had to jump out through the open door. Having heard the order to evacuate immediately, Bronisław Majtczak could not carry it out at first. As he recalls, "My hands and feet failed to work while there were only shreds of thought running through my mind. So this is where my trip ends. I will never see my loved ones. I will never see Warsaw again." The Soviet Li-2 plane was sinking for several days like Shackleton's ship crushed by the ice over 50 years before. The team of 12 Polish Soviet survivors had to cover a dangerous way, first walking on delicate ice floes and then on slippery rubbles, scattered everywhere as if some giant's hand threw them from the air. Interestingly, the expedition took place on January 17, 1966, exactly 56 years before Robert Scott headed back from the South Pole. The main building of the AB Dobrowolski Station was hiding quite a surprise. A Polish flag that used to fly on the pole 7 years before now covered the dining table, on which, according to traditional Polish hospitality, there was an impressive cake left, together with an uncorked bottle of wine. On a light cardboard box, there was an inscription embossed in red letters: Confectionery Manufacturer Staropolanka in Przygoń, Łask District. At first we were eating it with a bit of distrust. As for a cake, it was ancient indeed. The darker side of the White Continent also manifested itself to the last Polish expedition of 1978. An unfortunate accident already took place at the Mirny station. Just before New Year's Eve, during a complicated operation of unloading the Zawichost ship, one of Polish Me-2 helicopters got destroyed. As a result, Russian support was essential in order to make the transport to Dobrowolski station possible. After a few days, a plane that was supposed to help left the Młodzieżna station. Unfortunately, the machine broke down immediately after takeoff. Soviet polar explorers died in the catastrophe, which brought mourning to the Mirny station. On January 21, 1979, the Polish flag fluttered for the third time over the two little houses proudly named Krakow and Warsaw. The national anthem was playing from the loudspeakers. Thanks to minor maintenance work done by the previous lodger, the station, left non-resident for 13 years, remained in a good technical condition. The last Polish stay at the Dobrowolski Polar Station lasted 1 month. Unstable atmospheric conditions typical for bunker oases used to designate a schedule for the quickly passing days. The research scope covered the areas far away from the Polish base, therefore the researchers often depended on a Polish helicopter. Many a time they spent long nights in the wind-blown tent camp. In his book, Edward Wiśniewski describes struggling with the unpredictable element. With such wind, it is impossible to stand straight. That is why we are lying down in the storm-struggled tents, protecting them at the same time from getting broken by the wind. I am trying to have a conversation with my companion, but it's hardly workable because of the wind whistling and the tent cloth being pulled. I wake up at 6, the windstorm still blowing strong. It's 7 o'clock. Perfect silence. In 2010, one of the abandoned buildings was visited by Joe Chandler. The Australian press journalist wrote a mysterious report. About 8 kilometers away from the David Edgeworth camp in the Bunger's Oasis, crossing the hills following the path marked by the litter of wire and plywood and tin cans, you find a huddle of weather-worn buildings and a collection of rusting tanks, fuel drums, and gas cylinders. The Russians were here, and their machinery still lies on the ice. Even in the lake, pilots flying overhead sometimes glimpse the shadow of an old Antonov lying in the depths. The table is littered with cooking pots and plates, rotted fruit, half a loaf of a bulletproof bread, and a few slices of pink sausage. It's as if the helicopter had just flown in to retrieve the diners and they have simply got up, put on their coats and gone. There is a wine glass full of cigarette butts and there are empty vodka bottles tossed in the cupboards. A picture board stuck to the wall from a 1987 expedition is crowded with black and white snaps of whiskery men pouring shots and engaged in passionate dinner table discourse in this very room. In the corner, there's a stack of 78 records with CCCP emblazoned across red labels and a gramophone that can be wound into action. Soon, the voice of a Russian soprano begins to warble and crackle and fill the air, which is rank with remnant smells of food and fuel. It's reassuring to remember rummaging in the cupboards. There can be no rats, no spiders, just ghosts. In other bunkers, other rooms, there are 1950s radios set up to send Morse code messages, piles of smashed vials of medicines, newspapers in Polish, Russian, and English dating over 30 years. Over one bed, scrawled in red, Dale Anderson of NASA Research Station, California, declares he is here as part of a joint US-Russia Bunker Hills expedition, 1991-92. Onwards to Mars, a new era, new dreams, but enduring only in this forgotten place.